The desert does not forgive. The desert does not forget. It swallows the soil, the trees, the dreams of entire generations. For decades, the sands of Burkina Faso stretched further and further, devouring thousands of acres each year, leaving behind hunger and despair. And yet, from this barren expanse rose a figure with calloused hands and a vision larger than the horizon, Ibrahim Traoré. At an age when most leaders speak cautiously, he dared to confront the impossible. Where others saw nothing but dust, he saw the possibility of seed and harvest. Where the world expected silence, he declared dignity. Imagine it, a landlocked nation, counted out by history, now planting not just trees but hope itself into the heart of the Sahara's advance. A people once told they had no future now walking together, carrying saplings as if they were carrying their children. Stay with us. This is not simply a story of trees and soil. It is a struggle for sovereignty, a fight for survival, and perhaps a glimpse of how the map of the world might change. Subscribe, remain with us, and let us walk through this turning point in history together. The story begins not in the halls of power, but in the dust of the countryside. When Ibrahim Traoré assumed leadership of Burkina Faso, his foremost concern was not speeches or symbols of authority. It was the soil itself, fragile, exhausted, drifting further into the arms of the desert. Each year, thousands of acres were lost. The earth that once fed families became a barren wound, and the horizon itself seemed to retreat under the advancing tide of sand. Traoré recognized a simple but brutal truth. If nothing was done, hunger would not wait. Generations would be condemned to fight over crumbs, and a land already strained would break under the weight of despair. Against this grim backdrop, he conceived a national mission that many dismissed as naive, to plant trees on a scale never before attempted in Burkina Faso. But this was not to be a government project hidden in bureaucratic offices. Traoré made it a civic duty, a responsibility woven into the rhythm of everyday life. From the capital to the most remote villages, people were called upon to take part. Farmers were asked to set aside time each season to plant saplings. Schools were urged to educate children not just in books but in the act of nurturing life. Even weddings became occasions where couples planted trees in memory of their union, a living symbol of continuity. Soon the image of citizens carrying saplings into the desert became iconic. Men with hoes on their shoulders, women with babies in one arm and young plants in the other, children running with buckets of water, all moving together as if in pilgrimage. The desert, once a symbol of defeat, was being challenged by the calloused hands of its own people. The campaign grew into something larger than policy. It became a movement, a collective ritual of defiance. Entire communities marched towards the horizon with seedlings, as if declaring that no grain of sand could erase their will to survive. From the rooftops of Ouagadougou to the remotest hamlets, the air was filled with hope. A hope that green could rise from the dust. And indeed, millions of trees were planted. For the first time in living memory, the land seemed to breathe again. The young shoots took root, their tender leaves trembling in the dry wind, but still clinging to life. Farmers who had long abandoned the thought of fertile soil began to whisper of a future where fields might yield once more. International observers noted the scale of mobilization with astonishment. Could it be that a nation once spoken of only in terms of poverty and fragility had found a new language? The language of resilience? But the desert does not surrender easily. After the first waves of planting, a cruel reality returned. The winds rose, carrying storms of sand across the horizon. Saplings were torn from the earth, their fragile roots exposed and broken. The soil, starved of nutrients, could not nourish what little survived. Within 2 or 3 years, vast numbers of the trees had died. The sight of wilted trunks scattered across the sand became a devastating reminder of how fragile hope can be. Disappointment spread quickly. Critics said the entire project had been a dream too far, a leader's fantasy disconnected from the harsh truth of the desert. Farmers, exhausted from years of effort, began to doubt whether their sweat and labor had been wasted. Some whispered that the desert had proven itself stronger than any government decree, stronger than any national movement. And yet, in this moment of despair, something else began to stir. Traoré did not turn away. He did not accept failure as destiny. He looked at the broken saplings, at the barren soil, and declared that if the wounds of the land were so deep, then the cure must be even greater. He would not abandon the dream. He would reimagine it. The question became clear. If living trees could not survive the fury of the desert, could the dead themselves be turned into guardians of life? When the saplings withered and the fields returned to sand, Many said the dream was over. They whispered that the desert had claimed victory once again, that nothing could resist its relentless march. Yet Ibrahim Traoré refused to let despair become destiny. Standing before his people, he announced an idea that seemed almost absurd. If the living trees could not withstand the desert, then perhaps the dead could fight in their place. Stalks of millet, corn husks, and the remains of last season's harvest, what most considered waste, would now become the foundation of survival. His vision was as simple as it was radical. Lay these dried stalks across the sand in precise patterns, like a giant chessboard stretching into the horizon. Within each square, seeds would be planted. As the stalks decomposed, they would feed the soil. As they lay across the ground, they would hold the sand in place, shielding fragile roots from the winds that once tore them apart. At first, the people laughed. Dead plants cannot bring life, when they said. But Traoré persisted. He ordered workers to the desert, and soon lines of laborers stretched across the dunes, sweating under the sun as they laid golden mats of straw. The sight was surreal. In the heart of the desert, a shimmering lattice appeared, as though someone had draped a net of gold across the sand. Into each square, seeds were dropped. Not fragile plants, but hardy varieties bred to endure heat and drought. The people waited. Slowly, the miracle began. The sandstorms that once swept away young roots were tamed, their fury broken by the straw grids. Where before the desert wind roared unchecked, now it seemed as though its wings had been clipped. Inside those squares, seedlings found protection, nourishment, and a chance to grow. Within seasons, what had once been barren dunes now showed patches of green. The impact was astonishing. Studies revealed that sand drift was reduced by up to 99% in areas where the straw grids were laid. What had seemed like madness was now hailed as genius. Farmers who had abandoned hope returned to the fields, their hands once again planting with belief rather than resignation. The desert, for the first time, was forced to retreat. Reactions spread far beyond Burkina Faso. At first, environmental experts doubted the reports. They questioned whether such a simple technique could truly transform the land. But as evidence mounted, photographs of dunes stabilized, fields revived, seedlings thriving, skepticism gave way to admiration. International observers began calling it a model for other arid regions, a possible solution not only for Burkina Faso, but for deserts across Africa, Asia, and beyond. Within the villages, the emotional impact was even greater. Communities that had felt powerless now felt agency. Parents told their children that the desert was no longer an enemy to be feared, but a challenge to be mastered. The straw grids became a symbol, fragile to the eye, yet powerful enough to shield life itself. Traoré himself described it in poetic terms. The dead stalks of yesterday carry the breath of tomorrow. For a people long accustomed to loss, these words resonated deeply. What had once been discarded was now the very material of survival. The movement took on the character of a revolution, not one of guns and slogans, but of straw and seeds. Across the countryside, people spoke of dignity restored, of sovereignty reclaimed from the jaws of nature itself. Even in the harshest heat, men and women continued to lay down the golden grids, each square a defiant gesture against hopelessness. And yet, for all its success, one limitation remained. The work was painstaking. Laborers drenched in sweat laid the straw grids by hand. It was slow, exhausting, and limited in scale. If the desert stretched for thousands of miles, how could mere human effort keep pace? The answer, once again, would come not only from vision, but from innovation. The moment when machines joined the fight against the sands. The first signs of transformation were modest. A patch of grass here, a cluster of saplings there. Yet to the people of Burkina Faso, they were nothing short of a revelation. Fields once written off as lost causes now offered stalks of millet swaying in the breeze. For farmers who had abandoned their plows, the sight was like a promise fulfilled. Food security, once a distant dream, began to take root. Families who had relied on imported grain could now harvest from their own soil. Children, who had grown accustomed to seeing their parents return empty-handed from barren fields, now watched with wide eyes as baskets of produce returned to the villages. It was not abundance yet, but it was survival, and more than that, it was dignity. The impact went beyond food. With fields stabilized, livestock once again had grazing lands. Rural communities previously hollowed out by migration began to retain their youth. Instead of fleeing to cities or across borders in search of opportunity, young men and women stayed, seeing in the soil not futility, but a future. The desert had long been a reason to leave. Now, for the first time in memory, it was a reason to remain. In the villages, planting trees became as natural as paying respect to ancestors. Parents taught their children how to place saplings into the earth, telling them that each tree was a shield for the generations to come. Planting ceased to be a project and became a rite of passage. Across the country, what began as government policy evolved into a national culture. This cultural shift carried immense political weight. For decades, Burkina Faso had been portrayed abroad as fragile, dependent, defined by instability. Yet within its borders, people began to feel something rarely associated with a landlocked nation of scarce resources: pride. Pride that their labor had tamed the sand. Pride that their hands, not foreign aid, had shaped their future. For Ibrahim Traoré himself, the transformation reinforced his legitimacy. His rise to power through the Ibrahim Traoré coup had been viewed by many outside the country with suspicion, even condemnation. Yet within Burkina Faso, as fields turned green, the narrative began to shift. People no longer measured him only by the means through which he had seized power, but by the results his leadership had delivered. In villages where the soil itself seemed a whisper of renewal, his name was spoken not with doubt but with respect. Opposition voices, once vocal, found less ground to stand on. It was difficult to argue against success when food-filled bowls and livestock grazed on revived pastures. The campaign did not erase political divisions, but it softened them, replacing abstract debates with tangible evidence of change. In the marketplace, traders spoke less of conflict and more of harvest. In the schools, teachers reminded children that their nation had defied the desert itself. The symbolism was profound. Burkina Faso, long caught in cycles of dependence on foreign donors, began to embody a different philosophy: trade over aid, dignity over pity. Each tree, each straw grid was a declaration of sovereignty. The desert, once a symbol of weakness, had become a canvas upon which national pride was painted. Internationally, too, perceptions began to evolve. Traoré's methods, once dismissed as unorthodox, were increasingly discussed as models. But for the people themselves, the greatest victory was not recognition from abroad. It was the feeling that they had reclaimed ownership of their destiny. And yet questions lingered. Could these gains be sustained against the relentless march of climate change? Could a nation so small hold back the vast Sahara for long? Within the country, these doubts were real, but so too was the determination to continue. Beyond its borders, the world was watching, not just with curiosity, but with its own interests at stake. How would the international community respond to this revolution of soil and seed? Beyond the borders of Burkina Faso, the story of straw grids and saplings spread like wildfire. At first, regional observers treated it as a curiosity, an experiment too fragile to matter. But as the results became undeniable, international attention sharpened. The African Union issued statements praising the resilience of a small nation standing against the desert's advance. ECOWAS, long preoccupied with political transitions in the region, found itself pointing to Burkina Faso as proof that environmental security is inseparable from political stability. For once, the conversation was not about sanctions or coups, but about sustainability and survival. In Europe, policymakers debated whether similar methods could be applied to southern Spain or parts of the Mediterranean under threat from drought. Development agencies, often accused of clinging to outdated aid models, suddenly found themselves studying Traoré's techniques, wondering if partnership could replace dependency. Even the United Nations Environment Program took notice, highlighting the project as a potential blueprint for other arid regions across the globe. The reaction in the United States was layered. Environmental groups applauded the achievement, calling it a grassroots model of climate resilience. Policy circles, however, analyzed it through a geopolitical lens, asking whether the rise of Burkina Faso as a symbol of self-reliance might shift alliances or challenge the narrative of dependency long associated with the Sahel. To some, this was not merely ecological success, but a subtle assertion of sovereignty that carried political weight. Media outlets around the world found in Traoré a compelling figure. Headlines labeled him Africa's environmental hero, and documentaries showcased images of villagers laying golden straw grids under the blazing sun. In a world weary of climate pessimism, Burkina Faso offered a rare story of hope, proof that ingenuity and collective will could carve out victories even in the harshest conditions. What began as a domestic campaign was now spoken of as a Burkina Faso revolution, not of arms but of soil and vision. Commentators remark that revolutions are often measured in battles and blood, but this one was measured in roots and harvests. The idea that sovereignty could be defended not only with soldiers, but with seeds captured imaginations worldwide. Yet admiration was tempered by caution. Experts warn that the battle against climate change is relentless, that progress can vanish if efforts waver. For Burkina Faso, the challenge was no longer proving the method, but sustaining it against the enormity of the Sahara and the unpredictability of global warming. The question echoed far beyond the Sahel. Could the victories of today blossom into a sustainable future? Or was this only the beginning of a longer, harsher struggle? The achievements in Burkina Faso are undeniable, but they raise a pressing question. What comes next? A nation that once fought merely to survive now stands at the threshold of possibility. The road ahead is both daunting and filled with promise. On one hand, the opportunity is immense. The straw grid technique, combined with community mobilization, offers a model that could be replicated far beyond Burkina Faso. The Sahel, stretching across multiple nations, faces the same relentless advance of the Sahara. If this approach were scaled regionally, entire corridors of Africa could be reclaimed. This is not only about land, it is about food sovereignty, about giving millions of people the means to remain rooted in their homelands rather than forced to migrate. The prospect of economic renewal is equally powerful. Revived farmland can reduce dependence on imports, stabilize markets, and create employment. Young people, often tempted to leave in search of opportunity, might find livelihoods in the green economy blossoming at home. Roads and railways, once choked by drifting dunes, now have a chance to remain open. Arteries of trade rather than monuments to futility. Yet the challenges are no less real. Climate change is accelerating, and rainfall patterns grow more unpredictable with each passing year. Without continuous adaptation, gains can be lost in a single season of drought or a storm stronger than before. Financing remains uncertain. Can a nation with limited resources sustain the effort without succumbing to new dependencies? And politically, the question lingers. Will future leaders carry forward the same vision, or will the momentum falter? The future will also depend on partnerships. Already, neighboring states are watching closely, eager to test whether the golden net of straw can tame their own deserts. International organizations too weigh in, some offering support, others calculating the implications of a more self-reliant Africa. The balance between collaboration and sovereignty will be delicate, but decisive. At the heart of it all lies the spirit of the Burkinabe people. They have already proven that dignity can grow from dust, that hope can take root even where none was expected. What remains is whether this spirit can endure, generation after generation, until the desert itself accepts defeat. And so we are left with a question that refuses to fade. If Burkina Faso can reclaim life from the jaws of the Sahara, who else will dare to follow? From the windswept dunes of Burkina Faso to the eyes of the world, the journey of Ibrahim Traoré stands as a testament to what vision and determination can achieve. The Ibrahim Traoré coup may have been the event that brought him to power, but it is his unwavering commitment to transforming the land that defines his legacy. Where the desert once ruled, life now takes root. Where despair lingered, hope has found a voice. Millions of trees, once fragile and threatened, now flourish thanks to innovative techniques and the tireless efforts of a united people. What began as a national campaign has become a Burkina Faso revolution, not of weapons or political rhetoric, but of soil, seed, and the shared will of a nation. The lessons are clear. Sovereignty is cultivated with hands and hearts, not merely declared from offices or podiums. Dignity is reclaimed through collective action, and a nation's future can be rewritten one sapling at a time. The story extends beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The international community watches, learning that solutions to the harshest challenges may arise not from aid alone, but from ingenuity and local commitment. The Ibrahim Traoré coup may have shifted power within the country, but his environmental revolution is shifting paradigms across the globe. If a small landlocked nation can defy the desert, what stops others from rewriting their own destinies? As Burkina Faso's fields green and its communities thrive, the message resonates. No challenge is insurmountable when vision, courage, and determination converge. Each tree, each grid of straw, each drop of water embodies a promise that even the harshest conditions can yield life. The people of Burkina Faso have proven that when citizens take ownership of their future, the impossible becomes possible. Subscribe now and walk with us through stories that shape history. Share, comment, and stand with the people daring to transform deserts into fields of hope. Witness a revolution measured not in power or wealth, but in roots and harvests, and be inspired by a nation that turned dust into life.